What if I told you that there's a movie so uncomfortable that it almost makes you feel cramped? A movie so well made you could almost feel the scorching Texas sun. So good at making you feel uneasy, it doesn't need to shove blood in your face to freak you out. Well, this cheaply made 50-year-old movie has almost no blood, no extreme gore, and yet, it's one of the most brutal movies ever made. I am of course talking about
the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
The creator, Tobe Hooper, said the idea behind the movie was that it would enter your mind the way music does, and it's safe to say it definitely worked. Music doesn't need to explain anything to affect you, it makes you feel its themes. Texas Chainsaw does the same thing. You don't walk away remembering complex story beats, you remember sensations. The grainy old film, the real roadkill dragged in from nearby highways, the genuine bones filling the house. It's all real and uncomfortable. And the movie didn't do this to be edgy or grotesque, but because they had no choice. This movie had the budget that it takes to make one Na'vi in Avatar, or how much Elon Musk makes in 21 seconds. That $140,000 budget is nothing for a feature film. They used quite literally any means necessary to get this movie made, making for a film that's actually gross and insanely immersive. And that's exactly why it comes off as disturbing as it does. On top of that, the movie was advertised as a true story, which isn't exactly true, but it's also not entirely false. It takes a lot from Ed Gein in the Houston mass murders, not to recreate them, but to make it feel plausible. And when the movie released in theaters, it was treated as a sacrilegious problem film. Critics condemned it as sadistic, mainly because of the realism we talked about, alongside the advertising claiming it was a true story, all leading people to feel like they were watching something they shouldn't be, even preaching it loud enough that it was entirely banned in the United Kingdom, when in reality there was actually very little blood shown, perfectly demonstrating the effectiveness of a hopeless and desperate aesthetic. The movie opens with a text scroll explaining the true events that the movie follows. And mind you, in 1974, before Blair Witch and The Conjuring pulled the same true story trick, this was unheard of. So you can really imagine the audience filling their britches. A camera's bulb starts flashing, documenting a crime scene, accompanied by an amazingly used off-putting sound effect. We then see a display of bodies that were dug up at a cemetery and thrown together, made into some vile art exhibit getting absolutely roasted by the Texas sun, immediately basking us in that uncomfortable yellow heat while demonstrating the complete disregard for human life. The opening credits roll in and we see this really trippy visual of some oversaturated solar flares alongside some horrid noises of metal clanking and screeching. These noises are meant to represent some of the final sounds that animals hear before being slaughtered, because yeah, this movie is low-key a pro-vegan film disguised as a slasher, and if you watch it with that mindset, you will find a lot of not-so-subtle callouts about the mistreatment of animals in the meat industry. We meet our protagonist, brother and sister Franklin and Sally, and a couple of their hippie friends, Kirk, Pam, and Jerry. They're all road tripping through rural Texas en route to the cemetery where Sally and Franklin's grandpa is buried, coincidentally being the same cemetery that was vandalized in the opening. They want to see if old Gramp's gravesite was desecrated or damaged in the ordeal, but thankfully it wasn't. So our crew treks on, planning to head to Sally and Franklin's childhood home, which is in the area. Eventually, they drive by a slaughterhouse, where they playfully talk about how the animals are brutally executed, not so subtly foreshadowing their own demise.
They'd have to come up and bash him 2 or 3 times, and then sometimes it wouldn't kill him.
The camera lingers on the cattle for a suspiciously long time while we hear more of that awful metal scraping. They eventually pick up a hitchhiker. This greasy-haired tweaker who, surprise surprise, is related to the psycho family that completely ruins their lives later. He freaks everyone out immediately, ranting about how the slaughterhouses have replaced hard-working laborers like himself with machines and technology.
My collar's blue and my neck is red.
Him being a very aggressive, violent dude needed the job at the slaughterhouse as a release, because without it he can no longer take aggression out on his livestock, but instead, people. He takes a picture of Franklin on his camera and tries to sell it to him. Franklin, of course being a penniless hippie, can't afford the asking price. So the hitchhiker retaliates and cuts his arm, showing off his violent, unhinged nature. They kick him out and drive away, but not before he marks their car with blood. The group eventually gets to Sally and Frank's old family home when they step outside and notice the symbol that the hitchhiker smeared onto the van. Franklin is the only one to question it, but when he voices his concern, everybody is already inside the house hanging out and laughing, showing the utter carelessness these kids have. Kirk and Pam eventually head to an old swimming hole, but it's all dried up thanks to this Texas heat. They hear a generator running and get led to another property, much more upkept and taken care of than the Hardesty home. This is the Sawyer residence, where all of our protagonists will meet their fates. And fun fact, this place was actually turned into a real barbecue restaurant in Kingsland, Texas. It goes by Hooper's, an homage to the creator who unfortunately passed in 2017. Kirk steps inside after hearing some squealing, like any rational person would do, and then Leatherface pops out and bludgeons him. We are 35 minutes into this movie, by the way, in just seeing our main antagonist add to his body count, showing just how patient and careful the movie has been so far, just building tension and keeping us on edge, before absolutely throwing us in the deep end in just a couple of minutes. While Leatherface is having his way with Kirk, we see Pam walk up to the house looking for him. She winds up in a room full of real bones we were talking about earlier, including a real human skeleton that production got from India, which, not so fun fact, is how most teaching skeletons were acquired back in the day. Companies fish dead bodies out of the Ganges River, sending them off all over the world to be used for learning, or in this case, lamps. Pam takes off when Leatherface comes out and swoops her up in this really iconic shot, where we get our first decent look at Leatherface. When he gets Pam inside, he places her on a meat hook before proceeding to face camp her. And this is actually what most people consider the goriest part of the movie, but in actuality, nothing is shown here. The camera flashes to a sharp hook before cutting to a close-up of Pam seemingly hanging on it. No blood, no close-ups, no splatter. Just clever editing and camera tricks, letting your brain do all of the dirty work. Back with the rest of the group, we see Sally, Franklin, and Jerry discussing the mark that the hitchhiker left, when Jerry decides to split, looking for Kirk and Pam himself. He too ends up at the Sawyer residence and decides to enter the private property, so far keeping Leatherface innocent in a court of law. He ends up in the meat hook room where he finds Pam locked in a freezer along with a rubber mallet in his skull. Leatherface looks almost remorseful and full of regret for all of the harm that he's caused, before promiscuously licking his pearly whites. The sun has gone down and Frank and Sally think everyone must be lost, so Sally decides to push Franklin through the woods in an attempt to find the others. But instead of the scorching yellow light from earlier, everything is drenched in these deep blues, keeping us in the cold dark just as much as our protagonists. Leatherface jumps out and brings Franklin his death, finally giving us some chainsaw in this Chainsaw Massacre. Sally books it through the woods, running from the sound of the chainsaw trailing behind her. Unfortunately, she ends up running right to the Sawyer residence, seeking help, hiding from Leatherface on his home turf. She manages to lock the door behind her, forcing Leatherface to saw it open, who definitely won't be getting that security deposit back. Sally runs into more of the Sawyer family, first of which, the disheveled old grandpa who's clinging to life, and this literal corpse, which I can only assume is Grandma. Leatherface finally gets through the door, beelining straight to Sally, so she jumps out of a window from the second story. She limps away from the house and eventually makes it to a barbecue joint, where she pleads for this guy to call the police. But unfortunately, being in buttfuck Texas in the 1970s, this place of course doesn't have a phone, so he tells her they'll have to drive to a nearby town to get some help. This place is also a real-life tourist attraction in Texas. It sells a shit ton of merch and even has a replica van from the movie right outside. The barbecue cook comes back inside before relentlessly beating the shit out of Sally with a broom. He ties her up and shoves her in a burlap sack, throwing her into his car and bringing Sally back to the Sawyer residence, making him yet another member of this twisted, cannibalistic family. When they approach the house, they run into the same hitchhiker that terrorized the kids earlier, showing that our group stepped into this trap much earlier than anybody thought. They get Sally inside and tie her up to a chair made of human remains, forcing her to join the family for dinner. And we begin one of, if not the most iconic scenes in this entire movie. We have Sally completely helpless, gagged, and tied up while the entire family taunts and grabs at her. We get these uncomfortable, weirdly oriented shots of her struggling and pouring sweat. Yet again, the movie is not showing anything explicitly graphic here, but at the same time it's so distressing and horrific. Dinner begins with Gramps sucking some blood out of Sally's finger, as is tradition, before she passes out due to the stress of the situation. After a while, she wakes up in the middle of the dinner service and screeches, sending everyone else into a laughing fit. Things cool down and Sally starts to bargain with them, begging for her freedom. It of course doesn't work, only sending Sally into even more hysteria. The screaming becomes too much for the Sawyers and they decide to finish her off, letting Grandpa take a swing at it. They cut her ropes and drag her over to the old bastard. Armed with a hammer he could barely keep up, and the assistance of Leatherface, they playfully attempt to execute Sally. With their guards down and her ropes untied, she uses the opportunity to run, leaping out of a window, causing the actress that plays Sally to legitimately twist an ankle, making the agony portrayed here uncomfortably real. The Sawyers chase Sally down the driveway when a semi-truck pulls up and completely flattens the hitchhiker. Kinda ironic, huh? The trucker stops and picks Sally up when Leatherface finally catches up and starts chainsawing the door. They crawl out of the passenger side and continue running. The trucker hurls a wrench at Leatherface, causing him to fall over and nick his leg with his own saw. And right as the sun is rising, a different truck shows up. A blue pickup stops and gets Sally in the back, driving off and getting Sally out of this absolute nightmare scenario. We see Leatherface swinging his chainsaw around in frustration, ending the movie on a beautiful yet horrifying shot. That was the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, a movie released over 51 years ago and still terrifying people. And not with outdated prosthetics, but due to the complete absence of them. The movie that was destined to be a complete flop changed the entire landscape of horror. The masked killer, the final girl. So many things you find in modern horror today were all planted here.